Yeah, hey guys. So today I kind of wanted to cover just kind of what happens when a record is populated into MDM. So there's three different phases to that, which I wanted to kind of cover and help users understand. So they might understand why certain records are quarantined or why the flow of operations are this way. So the three phases are validation, enrichment, and incorporation. So first things first is validation. Think of validation as essentially validating that entity XML for very, very preliminary checks. So for example, did the source, is it valid? Does that domain allow updates, create requests from that specific source? Does this does this entity XML respond and conform to the model definition? So, for example, is there like something such as, is there over 5,000 characters? So you're just validating that, essentially that entity XML to just for any preliminary checks. Another preliminary check that this would check is the entity ID missing. This is missing, this is going to get quarantined immediately because as I mentioned, you always need an entity ID. From there, it goes into an enrichment phase. So at that point, I'm within the master data hub. So as you can see here, I had my model and I went to my data quality steps. If none are specified, this part is skipped. But if so, you can add data quality steps, which we talked about before. They're just essentially, as I mentioned, enrichment, where you can add a Boomi process, or you can add some sort of business rule to further validate your processing or record logic. So we'll create one of these eventually, but just understand that it does change the structure of essentially that document, and you can apply these sort of rules and Boomi processes that kind of, I guess, either enrich, change, or modify your incoming data. So if that fails, it goes in the quarantine. If this is successful, then you're at the point called incorporation. So essentially, how this check works is this golden record linked to an entity already? So as we mentioned, that source entity ID is super important because it links that source to the golden record. So if yes, it goes through the update phase. If no, it goes through the create phase. So let's start with the create. So there's currently no linkage. So what's going to happen is we're going to essentially check that record. We're going to apply those match rules that we created. So for example, let's say we apply match on social or items such as that. That fails, it goes into the quarantine. So let's say that essentially this passes. What happens now is that we're validating that specific entity. So we're essentially validating if the data type is valid for all fields, the required fields are there. So as I said, let's say I had another field that was required. Is that there? Are the data types proper? So I'm not sending Booleans instead of strings, items such as that. Then it just checks, does the source automatically allow you to create, or do you require approval? So we'll get more into that, but think about it this way, where you can set up a source that you have to approve any sort of updates from it. So let's say it's good to go. We're going to create that golden record. Let's say the golden record is already linked, like I talked about. So essentially what happens here is we don't apply any match rules because we know that it's linked to a record. So we're going to validate that entity as we talked about previously. So checking the data types, the required fields, et cetera, et cetera. We're going to check if the source can automatically update records. If yes, great. And we're going to update that golden record. So that's kind of the flow of it. We actually have a very helpful flow chart in our help documentation that I'll attach to this specific module as well if you want to follow, because there are more granular details that I didn't cover. So for example, something called a collection, which we haven't talked about yet. But I just wanted to give a high level overview before we continued. All right, sounds good, guys. Bye.